Oh, it's 8. Okay, awesome. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second Women's Human Rights Campaign Australia New Zealand webinar. We've slightly messed this one up if you got here before the 7 p.m. time. But that's all part of the fun. So it's awesome to have Kathleen Stock with me today, and we're just going to ask. We've had some people submit questions, and we've prepared a bunch of what we consider to be hard questions for each other. So we're just going to kind of run through those, and we're aiming to go for between an hour to an hour and a half. So just depending how interesting the conversation is and how annoyed we get with each other, maybe. So I'll kick right into it. Before I go to the submitted questions, I noticed that in one of your tweets, Kathleen, about this event, you identified me as a radfem, but yourself as not a radfem, and I found that interesting. So I thought maybe we could start there. Do we think of ourselves as radfems, as gender critical feminists, as neither, or as both? So why don't you start?
So I don't think of myself as a radfem, but I think I'm radfem adjacent. So my ambivalence about calling myself a radfem is really my ambivalence about calling myself anything. I'm a bit uncomfortable with calling myself a gender critical feminist too, just because I think people tend to think that means that you must sign up to some stuff. You know, it comes a shorthand for, oh, she thinks this, and this, and this. And I really never want anyone to assume in advance what I think about anything, really. And especially when I'm still working out myself. So there's quite a bit of classic radfem text that I really like and I'm inspired by, but there's other stuff that I really disagree with. And that would go for pretty much any intellectual tradition at all. What I do think is a scandal is the way that radfems are treated by universities and in the academy. It's just disgusting. So I think I'm always pleased to fight the corner of radfems, but I don't think I'm one.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, that's what I'd say to that. What about you?
I think I am one, and I think they're pretty intimately related. So I do self-declare myself as both a radfem and a gender critical feminist. But mainly, maybe that's because I feel like I have some control over what that means, which might be a little arrogant. Just in the sense that, like, I've been obsessively kind of reading into the history and then trying to write about what gender critical feminism really even is, and then how it's related. So my conception of gender critical feminism is as a kind of revival of radical feminism, but I get to pick the bits, I think, other bits we keep, and so there's some like that gives me a lot of latitude, right? I don't feel bound to inherit any particular idea.
I think once you've written it down, and especially if you're going to publish it, then you can just say, I think that, and then there won't be any ambiguity. But until you've done that,
exactly,
it's easy for people to attribute stuff to you that you don't think.
No, I take that risk. I see that risk. So good. So let's move on to the submitted questions. So
Okay.
I'll ask the first one. So the first one says, I'm interested in your views on notions of inclusion and equality and how these terms interact with more pluralistic concepts like diversity. In terms of public policy, for example, it seems that many institutions strive for inclusive gender policies, which declare their ambition to embrace diversity. Yet it seems that homogeneity, a lack of dissent, and the establishment of a hierarchy of power and interest are really the goal. Is it time for gender critical feminists to change the terms of the debate?
Okay, well, I agree with a lot of that, although I don't think it's, what does this person say? I don't think homogeneity is the goal. I think the goal is probably quite well intentioned when people talk about inclusion and diversity. And there's a reading of it where it's perfectly fine, and actually what we should be going for, which is a lack of barriers into organizations or into power structures based on group identity.
Yeah.
group membership, not identity, actual membership. But inclusion and diversity as mantras, like they're like just sort of robotically intoned by HR companies now without any thought as to what that means and how it should be implemented. And how it's actually working out on the ground, as you know, is that people have decided concepts should be inclusive, right? Now that just goes against what a concept is for. A concept is supposed to be exclusive. It's supposed to pick out that group and only that group in order to be able to talk about it and track it through various social domains. So once our concepts get inclusive, it actually works against the goal of inclusivity, because it means we can't properly talk about minorities or marginalized groups with a word that refers only specifically to them.
Yeah.
So there's something gone haywire in conversations about inclusivity, and we need to sort that out. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that one. What about you?
I guess I would just add to that, when I was thinking about how that sort of is working practically in Australia, I haven't noticed that much yet that that when we talk about gender equality, we've had the concept creep into meaning all sorts of other things. So for now, it seems like usually it's just a kind of euphemism for sex. So we're still sort of talking about the same thing. People in the chat might want to say if they've had different experiences, but so I guess the practical advice I would have is just to keep an eye on that, right? So if it looks like that concept creep is happening, then to just keep pointing out, like, sex also matters and sex is a thing we should be tracking, and maybe, you know, if women are underrepresented, let's care about that, even if we're also trying to get more gender minorities into a workplace.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely happening in the UK. For instance, events on the gender pay gap have written underneath them, open to self-identifying women.
Mm-hmm.
So, and in fact, Athena Swan, which is an organisation that supposedly its one job was to bring all women into STEM originally, and now it's widened its remit. But Athena Swan, I think, defines gender inequality in terms of gender identity. So it's definitely I would say it's coming. I'm really surprised it's not there in Australia yet, given what else is going on there.
Yeah.
Okay, so sorry. So, I mean, it's my question.
I think it might be, yeah.
Right, I'm going to ask Holly a question now, and this is another one we got. Most people don't feel they have a gender identity. Their bodies tell them which sex they are. What are your views on gender identity? Does everybody really have one?
Yeah, I have opinions, and I'll give a few, but I also feel like you're better placed to answer this question, given that you've just written a whole book about gender identity. But I guess my impulse is to be pretty skeptical about the whole notion, and I guess I don't see much in how it's used now that tracks anything that seems true and useful. So I think, at least reading some of the older sexology stuff, and especially in Michael Bailey's book talking about feminine boys, that seemed like a real phenomenon. Like, there were these kids who just, for whatever reason, had these extremely kind of effeminate boyhoods, and that looks like something that to me deserves the label gender identity, or something like gender identity. Like, there's really something going on with them that's different to what's going on with everyone else. But I guess there's just been such a huge expansion of that concept and category, and it looks to me like whatever was going on that we kind of knew about under the umbrella of trans, it's just been kind of glossed over with this contemporary concept, gender identity, which just looks pretty meaningless to me. So I think I'm pretty skeptical. I kind of feel like most people don't have one, at least in that sense. And I guess the only thing I'd say on the other side is that I sort of empathize with the project of trying to find a universal way to describe a trait. So, in our like Equal Opportunity Act here, we don't protect being black or being female. We protect race and we protect sex, right? And so that there is something nice about that, where it's like, it's a thing that everyone has and it's protected in principle, but we all know that only some people have the kind of one that gets mistreated. So it's particular races or particular sexes. So I sort of see what they were trying to do with gender identity. Like they were trying to find a way to describe a thing that everyone has, but then we can pop it into our symmetrical list of protected attributes, and then we could have a further idea about like who were the group that actually get mistreated. But I think because of the concept creep from like a meaningful diagnostic objective idea of a gender identity to this ridiculous thing we have today, that's all gotten really messed up. So that's my sort of take, but you should say more because you
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything you said, actually. I mean, I think the best understanding of what a gender identity is a thing that some people have, and it's like a strong psychological identification with the opposite sex, or an ideal of the opposite sex, or with androgyny in the case of non-binary people. So not everyone has one of those. Like, I'm not particularly psychologically identified with an ideal of the opposite sex. And it also, if you define it like that, it becomes asymmetrical. You can't really easily understand a strong psychological identification with your own sex, which is what it would have to be in order for everyone to have one, I think. Although I think there are some people that are, strongly psychologically identified with ideals about their own sex.
Yeah, I think so too.
It's not the norm. And given that that's what I think the best explanation of it is, or the best account of it is, obviously that's not the same thing as something you're born with, something that's essential to you either, because you can change your psychological identification throughout life. Not everyone does, but it definitely happens. Like, some people strongly identify with something at one point and then leave it behind them. And it also just doesn't, it's not pathological. It's not something that needs medication necessarily. And it's not something really that you could explain in terms of oppression, I think, or at least it's not something that fits very well into a causal story of why people get oppressed. They get oppressed for the things they wear, or the things they do to their body, or things, in other words, that are behavioral and can be seen. But this is a psychological identification, and I don't think it really fits very well into the story about protected characteristics at all. I think so. That's why I think it's much better to protect something behavioral or visible, or something that there is arguably a fact of the matter, whether you fall into that category or not, that can be seen by other people.
Yeah. I've been trying to think about this in terms of what would be the more sensible thing for our law to protect, and I usually err towards thinking it's gender expression, because that protects the broader class as well of non-conforming people. The only counterexample I could make up for myself was, what if you can be gay and not have any, a gay man need not be effeminate or have any kind of external signs that he is, but if he's known to be gay, he can still face discrimination in the workplace, let's say. And I was thinking, is there some version of that for trans where you're maybe not out yet, so you haven't started presenting in any gender atypical ways, but the fact that you're known to be trans would be enough for people to discriminate or treat you differently, and that thing couldn't be protected under gender expression or some other more concrete attribute?
Would that not fall under perceived to be, whatever it is? So, I mean, we're getting into deep waters here, so I don't know if I've thought this through, but if the protected characteristics is homosexuality or gender reassignment or race, sex, then it will presumably also protect people in certain circumstances perceived to be that thing. mistake that then people tend to make is they think, oh, the protected characteristic must be being perceived to be that thing and not the thing itself. And then we get into, we sort of move away from the core idea and invite lots of misunderstanding. But I think we can say totally coherently that there's a protected characteristic that's a fact of the matter. It's not whether you're perceived to be or not, but it also, in certain circumstances, protects people who are wrongly or rightly perceived to be that thing.
Yeah, right.
Anyway, I don't know.
Yeah,
I think that we'd have to think that through in detail.
Yeah, but maybe that works. Okay, let's move on to the next one. So this is, do you think the gender identity / trans craze is more of a current fashion because of postmodern cultural narratives?
Well, they haven't helped. I think, it's a cause. If we're looking for a cause, there's going to be a lot of strands to this. It's going to be multifactorial, and some postmodern cultural narratives are in there. Not all, right? I think there's now a backlash against postmodernism and post-structuralism, which tends to flatten it all out into, it's all nonsense. But actually, I don't think that's true either. But Judith Butler hasn't helped. Yeah. And I think the attraction of Judith Butler is more than the sum of her intellectual contribution. To some people, it's like she's cool, she's countercultural, she's gorgeous. She represents the outsider, and that hasn't really helped either. If Judith Butler had less charisma, I don't think we'd be where we are. But having said all that, I don't think we should overstate it. Like, most people don't have a clue about post-structuralism, outside the academy. So I don't think it's responsible for all of it. I don't know. What do you think? Have you got a view?
I don't. This is something that I'd really like to have a better grip on, the sort of full intellectual history of what are the ideas trickling out of the academy, and how did they morph, and how does it explain our current cultural context. But I haven't done enough of the reading, and I think we talked the other day, I've started in a place that's maybe not the most reliable source. So I think I'm still getting my head around it. And I tend to sort of flippantly sometimes just be like, queer theory, Judith Butler, in that hand-wavy, instinctive blame way. But I don't have a excellent grip yet on the exact explanations.
I mean, one way in which in the UK it's become important is through kind of populist understanding of Judith Butler's views has trickled into activist groups, particularly, I believe, Gendered Intelligence.
Right.
And so if you look at Gendered Intelligence's website, they say a lot of things that sound quite like Butler. And I find it really hilarious, because it's just so tragic. But there is a black comedy to be written about how the UK prison service ended up being influenced through these activist groups by the ideas of Judith Butler, who thinks that there's really no such thing as a fact about underlying material reality, that everything is constructed. There's not one empirical, there's hardly any empirical information in any of her books. It all comes from right up here, massively high abstract thought, trickling down to influence what's going on in the UK prison service, and resulting in males, sex offenders without gender recognition certificates or any kind of bodily modification being put in women's prisons. I mean, that's just
it's amazing. It is amazing.
It's a scandal.
Yeah.
And someone better write about it later, the history of how this happened. I mean, Michael Biggs has written a really great paper on that. I don't know if anyone will publish it, but
I didn't know that. Is Jane Claire Jones writing a book on this topic?
I don't know if she's right. I think she's writing several books, possibly. She's another source of information about how this is happening, and she's going deep into it.
Yeah.
But there's so much material here. It really be looked at, but at the moment we can't do it properly unless you're very brave, because it would, to uncover the sort of causal story would be to expose
Yeah.
the fact that it involves a lot of fiction.
Yeah. Good. Okay, your turn.
Yep, sorry. Okay, now, is there a parallel between everything is transphobic on the one hand and everything is homophobic, everything is misogynist on the other, coming from two sides in this debate? Does that make sense? Yep.
Yeah, it does. I think the answer to this is yes, there is a parallel. I remember when I was still allowed on Twitter, and I would, I think, use the everything is misogynistic defense quite liberally. And I remember encountering the frustration of my peers, like when they, in that they expressed that they thought that it was overused, right? And so there is an interesting parallel between the way that we as feminists deploy that's misogynistic or that's homophobic in defense of our views, and the way that trans activists seem to rampantly overuse everything as transphobic. And I guess, like, I just don't know what the right strategy is now that we've noticed that, but we are where we are, because there seems to be a kind of arms race, right? Like, on the one hand, we could say, well, we kind of hate it when they do it about everything, like not everything's transphobic. Maybe we could both retreat and be a bit more reasonable. But on the other hand, I have this strong sense that we as, pending the things we said about our labeling at the start, but we as gender critical feminists, we're very often on the defense rather than the offense. And it's been something I've kind of noticed in this debate, that we'll get ludicrous accusations and then we'll carefully and meticulously kind of explain ourselves and defend ourselves against this nonsense or this mischaracterization. And actually that I wrote this essay sometime last year called like Crossing the Gender Picket Line, and my explicit motivation was that I wanted to do my first offensive strike, to be like, you guys are actually doing something shitty and morally wrong. You guys, the trans activists, you're failing to show solidarity with feminist projects, and you're actually impinging on long-running projects that we've had in place to try to erode gender norms. You guys are doing something wrong and you need to stop it. So I sort of, I think we could recognize the symmetry of the accusations, but it's not quite clear to me whether that means we should back down, because I think if we back down, they would just keep being obnoxious, and then we would be on the back foot again. So maybe...
But I think you could have both, because it's what you just said there about they're failing to show solidarity and they're undermining long-held feminist projects is true.
Yeah, it's true.
Right? It's perfectly true, and we could provide evidence for it.
Yeah.
Endless evidence for it. So, on the other hand, that sort of claim gets discredited if we're constantly... if we were constantly on the offensive, which we're not. So I think we get more credibility by being nuanced in saying, well, that's an example of misogyny, but not using it as an explanation all the time. So I would take the first road, I think. Even if they carry on, and I agree, what we do won't affect what the opposition do, and there are risks. It's like a prisoner's dilemma sort of thing.
Yeah.
Like, we play nice, we go high, they go low.
Exactly.
Yeah. Not all trans activists go low. I'm trying not to generalize about this, but there is a lot of smearing and straw manning, and people don't seem to be interested in what we're really saying. Yeah.
No, but I take your point that there's reasons just within our own side in terms of kind of credibility and integrity to not overuse these accusations, regardless of the politics of the coordination game or the conflict. Yeah. Exactly. Okay, next question. This is an interesting one. So homosexuality is sometimes defined as the attraction to the same biological sex, but obviously there's a lot more to lesbian attraction than the attraction to a vagina. What are your thoughts on the reasons why lesbians often don't want to date the trans women who claim to be lesbians, whether they've kept their penises or not?
What are my thoughts on the reasons why lesbians often don't want to date trans men? Well, my thoughts are to do with the definition of a lesbian. Right. So I think that sexual attraction, sexual orientation is directed towards sex as a fundamental component, biological sex as a component, and that gives us a really useful way of categorizing different kinds of orientations, right? So once we've identified the lesbians and they're same-sex attracted by definition, then it's not really going to be surprising that they're not attracted to males, people of the opposite sex, with penises or without penises. There are sort of limiting cases or sort of cases on the margins where things are going to get messy, in the sense of it's not, our attractions aren't under our own control. And if you're attracted to women and this is a person who looks exactly like a woman because they've changed lots of things about their body over the years, you might well be attracted to them, and I don't think it would disqualify you from the lesbian club. I think that's just human sexual desire. But just because there are borderline cases, as in this debate, throughout this debate, just because there are borderline cases does not mean that the whole category collapses. And does not mean that in a non-borderline case, you should fancy them too, or, just because they say they're a woman. Because there's plenty of people calling themselves lesbians now that aren't, are visibly male. So that's what I think. I mean, I don't think it's controversial. Now, that gets misinterpreted all the time as policing desire. Fine. I absolutely have how could I have any problem with who people fancy? It's just a matter of categorizing correctly and to leave a space for people who don't want to do that, who have their own interests, as you know, because we're both members of that group, who have their own interests politically and need to be able to speak about them, and not have other people take the mic, basically. And then all the other problems that are involved in males declaring themselves to be lesbians. There are several.
I would be really interested to know just the empirical question of how many people there are that are kind of like stably categorized as lesbians who are or would be attracted to feminine appearing people with penises. Just because I felt like in some of the social media debate, this was often like a point where the trans activist side would just sort of cite all these cases of lesbians who were perfectly happy dating trans lesbians, and then kind of try to use that as a proof that we were just being bigots or so. But I mean,
those two things don't even go together, right? So empirically, so I hear, and I don't know whether this is true or not, but sexologists say that women are much more flexible in general and much more prone to bisexuality than men. I don't know if that's true. But that's like a description. It's not an evaluation. That's just, if that's true, that's the way it is. It's still compatible with some people absolutely being exclusively same-sex attracted. And the trans activists, and not just the trans activists, there's a whole kind of moralizing discourse going on about sexuality at the moment, which says it's a matter of equality who you want to have sex with, and you should fancy this group. Even if you don't, you should. That's preposterous. Like, we shouldn't be getting morals into who you are attracted to. You either are or you aren't. And so even if empirically it turns out that quite a lot of lesbians would happily sleep with a trans woman, others wouldn't. And that they should be left alone, and we should continue to have words to describe them and their interests. So it's a mixing up of empirical and kind of moralizing in this debate that's just not helpful.
No, I agree with you, but I think the last thing you said is really important, right? That you, in a way, the categories would just move sideways because you would still need a term to pick out the exclusively same-sex attracted lesbians, even if you wanted to change the broader category lesbian.
That's true too. I mean, it depends. I think sexual orientation is a disposition that's manifest over many occasions, right? So one swallow does not make a summer, so to speak. So like, it doesn't matter. We all have aberrations from our trajectory in the course of a life, usually. But if you're repeatedly attracted to people with penises, chances are you should be including that in your orientation. Yes.
Okay, should we go on?
Yes. Okay. So this is a big one. How much time we got? Is gender abolition a coherent goal?
Oh, that is the big one. I think this is a great question because I think it is our goal as radical feminists, for sure, and as gender critical feminists, I think so. I think that goal has been inherited, but I think there's a lot of room for maybe talking past each other in exactly how that's understood. So I noticed that when I read Deborah So's book, for example, she's kind of claiming gender is biological, but she obviously doesn't think all of the things packed into what we think of as femininity across history are biological. So she clearly makes some implicit distinction between the silly stuff, like loving baking or whatever, and then the stuff that is plausibly even a candidate for being biological, right? And so I guess for me, maybe that's the space where there's room to disagree about, like, on how much gets packed into gender insofar as we want to abolish that stuff. So the way I understand the RadFem project is whatever the stuff is that our long kind of long history of like ideology built up to justify male dominance, whatever that stuff has done to women, what norms it has created, what stereotypes it's built, all that stuff that makes women be a way that they wouldn't be otherwise, or that they are not naturally in any given context, abolish that stuff. I think that leaves plenty of room for some stuff still being a real sex difference, or so I don't think that the radfem or the gender critical feminist has to be committed to any sort of like blank slateism. I think there's room to discuss which stuff is socialized or inherited and which stuff is biological, if any is. But I think we want to abolish whatever's in the category of the stuff that we've inherited or has been imposed on us.
So you think there's nothing good? Just take the social stuff.
Yeah.
Say that we could clearly identify stuff that could have been different.
Yeah. Even
within biological difference. You think there's nothing to be retained there or good about it?
So now do you mean good and to be retained for any human? Because if that's what you mean, then I think there's loads that's good. But if you mean good and to be retained for female people only as a kind of role or expectation, then I think no.
Nothing.
What do you have any examples of?
Yeah, like book groups. I don't know, like feminine companionship, gossip, knitting circles. I don't know, stuff that women do that men don't tend to do, with exceptions. Obviously, you would always have to have exceptions built into all this discussion. So I don't think gender abolition is a coherent goal at all. But I need to nuance that a bit. Because it obviously depends on how you define gender. This is why I can't say I'm a radfem.
Yeah.
I think. It depends on how you define gender. If you were to define gender as the harmful social stereotypes, the ones that harm women and men, then I would be more down with it. But if the project is to sort of erase all social differences between men and women, I don't think it's possible. I absolutely don't. We're social creatures, and there is a biological difference that will then get expressed through social behavior, and it will it will differ from culture to culture, but there will be a way that socially women are, and it will be developmental. There will be sort of acculturated into it, and there will be a way that men are. So when people say they want to abolish gender and you just have people, you just have men and women, but no kind of social stereotypes around that, I don't think it's possible. And particularly because of heterosexuality. Yeah. That is the confounding force in this plan, that sex keeps the species going. There's no way of getting rid of heterosexuality. Why would we want to? So there will be social stereotypes around sex, and there will be ways of being feminine in relation to being masculine in the domain of, sex as in sexuality, not biological sex. So I think our project is to get rid of some of the hideously harmful aspects of the social stereotypes we do have, and many of those are made much, much worse by capitalism. So objectification of women on a rampant scale, making women feel like they're objects from pretty much the minute they come out of the womb, making them aware of their appearance, their fuckability, their value as objects to other people.
Yeah,
that's the thing. I think we can change that. We could imagine different kinds of social meanings for men and women that didn't have these hideous consequences, but I don't think we can get rid of the whole thing.
So do you think, there's lots of ways in which humans might have some differences that kind of carve them up into, two groups or more than two groups. And I can imagine someone making a similar claim than you just made without the heterosexuality part, which I think might do a lot of work. But imagine they just said, yeah, look, there's always going to be height differences and people are just going to build social stuff on top of that. And so, call that something like what we have for gender. It's not that it's biological, but it's just that once we have a physiological or a biological difference, we just do tend to kind of add culture and meaning around it. And so I suppose the more skeptical thought would be there's no reason why that should be built around sex in the future. Maybe if we are the kinds of creatures that just love to have tribes and gangs and have little fun hobbies and habits built around them, maybe it's going to track some other difference in the future than sex. And I guess your comeback, I anticipate, will be that sex is actually, it's a likely one precisely because of heterosexuality and the kind of mating practices, whereas things like height or whatever other biological or physiological differences, they're just not as significant. So is that right?
That's exactly right. So, and there'll be ones around maternity and paternity, and anything to do with reproduction will generate its own sexual meanings.
Yeah.
But it is possible to imagine, I was trying to imagine last night what a healthier culture for women around sex would be, because I don't think it would involve the one we have on a number of levels. And I was thinking, could we could eroticize fecundity or something like that. I'm not saying this is not a proposal. It's just helpful to imagine alternatives. At the moment, we eroticize submissiveness, youth, skinniness, stuff like that doesn't really help women at all. So I think we should think about what alternative erotics might be, and obviously lots of people are, but whatever we go for, we should be aware that then capitalism will exploit it, and will make it into a commodity, and it will be a race down to the bottom of whatever it is. So that's part of the problem too, that even if I don't know, sometimes I feel a bit depressed about the future, because I think whatever feminists do, it will be ruined by the market. So.
What a depressing thought.
Yeah. Okay. So it's your question.
I think I have one for you. Yeah. So this, I'm super interested in what you think about this. I'm at the start of writing a paper, so this is basically just me getting you to write my paper for me. So to what extent do you think anyone in the gender critical movement is in fact responsible for what anyone else in the movement does, or answerable to anyone else in the movement? And I'm interested in this question in both the horizontal and the vertical way. So people that have some authority and influence in the movement being responsible or answerable to people with less. But also just our responsibility as a group for the renegade actors who might do things that we really don't like, or maybe we really do like. So just this kind of moral question of how much we're all on the hook for what other gender critical feminists do.
Well, this is why I wouldn't, this is part of my ambivalence about calling myself one thing or other, is as soon as you put yourself in a group, you start feeling responsible for what other people in the group do. Honestly, I don't think I'm remotely responsible for what anyone else does unless there's a special context that explains it. But normally, how could I be?
Yeah.
You know, I'm doing my best, and what I say is often misinterpreted, and then I can't control that, you know. So if somebody ends up doing or saying something on the basis of what I've said, that won't be my problem, although I will feel bad about it.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think, I mean, I guess you raised this because, you know, it's clear from what I've done in the past that sometimes I think it's strategic to distance myself from things that I personally don't think are right or do not fit with my values, because other people have a tendency to push us into this group.
Yeah.
Like, they perceive us as this mass. They think we're all connected psychically. You know, I don't know what, you know, people have this tendency to just think that especially when it's a kind of, there's a group of visible people, that somehow they're all constantly communicating and hanging out together. And in fact, I don't know half the people in the gender critical movement.
Yeah.
And ones I do know, I meet them like once every 3 years.
Are you denying that? Are you denying that there's a cabal of powerful lesbians?
Yes. Right. But does that address the question? Because there was also about like, what responsibility do we have to?
Well, I guess you've said something about how whether you feel responsible for others, but there's also the question of when others are angry at you, let's say, if that ever happened, would you feel like they could justifiably have any claim to?
Yeah. Well, like sometimes I do fuck up. Yeah, I mean, sometimes I tweet things I shouldn't, because I'm in a terrible mood, and I only realize afterwards, like, oh, I shouldn't have done that, or I've misunderstood something. Yeah, and I'm responsible for myself, but what I'm not gonna do, personally speaking, I'm not sure this is really answering the question, but just for the record, what I'm not gonna do is some abject apology online.
Yeah.
You know, I've reflected and I will do better.
I educated myself.
It's just so gross. Like, you know, it's not really an apology done for the right reasons normally anyway.
Yeah.
And something about making women in particular do it. You don't see men making those very often.
Yeah.
Sometimes making those kind of abject apologies. So, like, you know, what's it to you if I fuck up?
Yeah.
So I want to say that you don't know me, and I will clean up whatever side of the street I need to with the people that know me. But there are people on the internet that think, you know, they have an opinion about a lot of what you do, don't they?
Yeah, yeah.
And they don't know you. So,
well,
Holly, what do you think?
I mean, I basically share your view that I don't really think anyone is responsible to or for anyone else. But I think I've managed to convince myself of why at least some people feel really frustrated about this. Like, in the sense that I think there's some resentment might be the wrong word, but I understand that it's not possible for everyone to have a position from which they can speak and be heard, and that makes people feel really invested in what the people who have the position say. And I think at least that gives me an explanation of why sometimes people are so angry with each other in this debate, because they've put all their eggs in the basket of like you not fucking it up. I don't mean you, I mean like any of us who happen to be able to have a platform. So at least I understand, I think, where some of the frustration or anger is coming from, but I do still think it's fundamentally misguided. Like, I just don't think, because we're not an organized group, I just don't think anyone is answerable to anyone else. And if you don't like what they're doing, don't support them or try to start doing something yourself.
Also, the other aspect of this is that, like, just going along with the group and going along with the herd and saying what you were expected to say is what got us into this mess.
Yes.
Right. So I'm not going to start now thinking, oh, I better not say that I really don't agree with that person, because it might, you know, I don't know what's the bollocks has said, like it might fracture the group or whatever. Yeah. There is no group.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a group. There's a group of like-minded people, but we didn't swear an allegiance to each other and we didn't all take an oath. And criticism is healthy. So People will criticize us. I will criticize other people. That's the way it should be, because otherwise we turn into a hive mind, and we all know what happens with hive minds. So I just think that's the way I would take it out. But other views are available, right? There are other people that are constitutionally much more attracted to the idea of group solidarity, sisterhood, and stuff like that. And I'm not criticizing them. I do see the attractions of that. It's just I find it constrictive myself. I find that often when people talk about sisterhood, what they mean is, don't say that.
Yes, I have had the same experience. So yeah, I think that's right.
Okay, so how are we doing for time, by the way? Okay, yeah, we're all right.
Yeah.
Would there be the terrible consequences that some feminists think there would be if we actually acknowledged psychological, behavioural or biological differences between men and women? So this kind of relates to the gender abolition stuff.
Yeah.
You've already said no, I think. I think you said no, have you?
That there wouldn't be the terrible... I mean, I guess I think this question really just taps into that fault line that came out of the second wave about whether our approach to feminism is going to be a sameness or a difference one, right? Like, do we want to argue that women are the same as men? Like, the way to approach equality or liberation, depending what your goal is this sort of sameness, like we are all human and we have to be approached in exactly the same way? Or is it this, like, we are different in some interesting respects, but that doesn't affect our moral equality at all? And my sense from what I've managed to read so far is that we gave the sameness approach a really good crack, and it didn't get us everything we needed, because we are different in some important ways when it comes to sex and things like maternity. And so we actually do need different provisions. I think that was one of, McKinnon made that point really nicely. So I don't know, I sometimes think about this in parallel to gay rights. I mean, that's a case where I think it's really clear that there are just differences in sexual orientation, and it tracks a majority and a minority. I don't know what it would track under idealized circumstances. Maybe the proportions would be like a bit different than they are today when there's more homophobia, but I still think probably it's a minority. And that looks like a real difference, and we protected it, right? We didn't say, okay, from now on everyone's pansexual because we're all the same. Rather, we said, like, yeah, lots of people are heterosexual, some people are gay, get over it, we're all morally equal, that's fine. So there's been cases in the history of human rights and, like, trying to work for equality and liberation where we acknowledged and accommodated difference, and there have been cases where we really pushed for sameness. I think racial liberation struggle has been a case of push for sameness. That's because there probably isn't that kind of fundamental difference. So I guess I think it would be fine. Like, whatever isn't gender, going back to the earlier discussion, whatever stuff isn't socialized and we don't want to abolish, I think it's perfectly fine if we acknowledge that those are real differences and we're not exactly the same as men and we're not all human.
We're not all human.
Oh yeah, none of us are human. We're not all human because we're all human, but we're still... yeah, I don't know how to say that properly. Hopefully you just know what I mean.
Yeah. I mean, I have similar thoughts, really, especially about the futility of thinking we're the same if we're not the same. So that is an empirical question, and there is like historically a massive amount of defensiveness amongst feminists, to the point where some think they can settle that in advance. Just like, clearly there can't be differences, because if there were differences, they might be exploited to oppress us, as if they weren't already being exploited to oppress us. But so we need people like Cordelia Fine and Daphna Joel and their antagonists to get into that, and find out what the differences are. But that will be the way it is, if there is a way that it is. So neither of us think that everything's socially constructed to where it's just all up for grabs. So would there be the terrible consequences? No, because we have the capacity to offer remedial arrangements for differences where we think they impact on well-being of the group. And we could do that. And in some cases, we have tried. Governments have, and states have tried to do that.
Yeah.
So I think it's fine to acknowledge difference. And like I suggested, I think it's fine to retain social difference as well. And that there may be many valuable things within femininity, or some conception of femininity, that we could retain or foster or enjoy or promote as values. We're in this weird situation at the moment where femininity is simultaneously kind of fetishized and reviled.
Yeah.
So there's this kind of split attitude to it, but there's lots of valuable things about femininity and masculinity as well.
Yeah. I don't think I don't disagree with that. I think maybe the point where we might disagree is that I just think of all the things that are valuable about them, I don't see why they need to be tied to sex at all. And so I guess my vision of the wonderful gender abolitionist future is that there is masculinity and femininity still, but lots of the specific ways it shows up are just kind of separated. And then it's all decoupled. Well, it's like the firewood chopping people. There's some women and lots of men, and they do the firewood. That's just a one thing. And so it's like, you know what I mean? Like our mosaic of masculinity, if you wrote it all down, each of those I think would kind of get separated from each other. So it's not just this masculine people bundle, and then who could be those things would also not be tied to sex.
I just want to be clear that I'm not, because this area is just so fraught with misunderstanding, that I'm not suggesting that when I say there's valuable things about femininity, I'm not suggesting that men who exhibit these feminine traits should be thought of as abnormal or in any way discriminated against, and vice versa. So I'm not proposing some kind of weird future where masculinity only matches up with maleness and femininity only matches up with femaleness, because it won't. That's the point. It never has. And human life is too messy. It's not neat like that. Like, people identify with the opposite sex. Like they identify with the social stuff that goes with the opposite sex, and that's great and can be a real rich source in itself. However, we can acknowledge that and acknowledge the value of femininity and masculinity in some possible articulation of that.
Yeah, but do you think they are you seeing it as mostly still attaching on the basis of sex, but then they're just asked...
Conceptually, it can't be detached, because it wouldn't be masculinity. It wouldn't be the social meanings around sex. It would just, what would it be?
Well, it would have
go down a level to just chopping wood, whatever, hairdressing, whatever you want to put in there.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm thinking you tell a lineage story, right? So, of course, it's still masculinity. It's just that now that bundle of stuff, like the being stoic and providing and whatever, like you just fill in all the details, that stuff now is just stuff that anyone who's attracted to that can have. So maybe the question would need to be settled empirically, but it's like, how much of those two bundles of things are, like, how many of the people who are feminine or masculine are still women or men? And do you need a story about how, like, some people are just attracted to the opposite sex's social meaning stuff? Maybe not.
Whether you're a woman or a man has got nothing to do with it. Also want to make that clear. I'm absolutely not on board with the idea that femininity has got anything to do with being a woman, or masculinity has got anything to do with being a man. So
okay, now I don't even know now I'm totally confused about what your future proposal is, because I thought you were saying in any possible world, being of a sex is going to attract some sorts of social meaning and like maybe routines or rituals, and so we cannot abolish gender, which is the minimalist social meaning of sex. I thought that was
but that's got nothing to do with being a woman or a man. Being a man is adult human male. Being a woman is adult human female. You
agreed?
Agree.
Yep, yeah. Agreed. But then
that wouldn't change.
Totally. But the thing that your future that has the like much more minimalist social stuff, social meaningy stuff tied to sex, does that stuff I can't even ask this. Why does that stuff have to cluster around sex rather than just being kind of free-floating, interesting stuff that people can choose to make use of if they want to? I think that's my question.
Yeah, well, I think that's a false opposition. It's not free-floating, but people can take it up or not.
Okay.
I'm not suggesting that we alter people's preferences.
Yeah.
I'm saying conceptually identifiable as masculine by virtue of its relation to sex. Yeah. Otherwise, it just becomes behavior, human behavior. Like, it wouldn't even, these categories wouldn't even be, in the world you suggest, there won't be masculinity or femininity. There will just be human behavior. And I'm saying there can't just be human behavior. There will always be behavior which people understand as the social meaning of being female or being male. That's, I think that now we can try and alter what in practice that behavior is, but there will always be some stuff that is associated socially with being female and some stuff that's associated socially with being male. And that will be femininity and masculinity, whatever in practice the values are.
Yeah. I actually think we might just be having like a verbal disagreement, because I think there's a question about whether any social stuff that's stuck to male people, call it masculinity, or the current stuff that we think of as masculinity, including the chopping firewood, call that masculinity, and then whatever the future stuff is that's tied to the male sex, give it a new name. And I think maybe we're a bit confusing.
Maybe we are more in agreement than I thought we were.
Maybe.
Which is great.
Anyway, we can continue that another time. I think it's me next.
Right now. This is good. Oh no, it's yours. Oh, no. It's yours.
Yes, it's me. Good. So have feminists actually been complicit in creating the problem that gender critical feminists are now responding to? So we're seeing a big influx of men fleeing like refugees into the category woman. And I'm wondering if this is at least in part because feminists in the past positioned men as the baddies. So they blamed them for male privilege or male entitlement. Some of them said all men are sexists. Some of them said that men are actually biologically corrupt. And so, full separatism is our only option to escape from them. So if that's right, does that tell us anything about what we should be doing differently going forward? For example, not demonizing men.
I don't think it's helped. I mean, I think in every political movement you will get extreme positions emerging, and those tend to grab all the attention. So I don't think the entire feminist movement historically, even the radical feminist movement, demonized men. But some yeah. I don't think it helps, because if we're right and a lot of the problems stem from socialization, then men got socialized too. Like, for whatever behavioral category we're talking about, men got socialized too. It's not something they chose. Yeah. It's not something that they're even necessarily aware of. So to manifest total aggression towards them for it is not helpful or constructive, although it may make women feel better.
Yeah.
And it's also another thing for the record, that I think is unhelpful is the ignoring of the role that women play in propping all this stuff up. Like, again, they shouldn't be demonized for it because they've been socialized into it, but you can't have this kind of double standard where you let the women off for being socialized and blame the men for being fully in control of it all. And I had this really quite strange experience last year, I think it was, when I went to that Women's Place meeting in Brighton, which there was a huge amount of protest at, and it was a really scary experience to walk in there, because there was just like thronging trans activists from the Labour Party conference who'd been sent there with megaphones, and there was water thrown over a couple of people, and I was kind of handed on the back of the head as I went in, and the route was blocked. It was really like complete mayhem and really adrenalizing. But I walked in, managed to get in, and two women in front of me, and they turned around and they were just like, men, God, bloody men. And I was like, those were women's voices. It was a woman holding a biological woman with a loud hailer. It was a woman that manhandled me. It was women. Yeah. And women are at the forefront of trans activism. Yeah. They are usually doing it as allies So there's lots of reasons why, you could say they're socialized into helping and to being good soldiers, but they are there. So I don't think we help when we make this, let women off the hook in the sense of ignore their contribution and at the same time attribute massive responsibility personally to men. So I wish to find a way, and that's my aim really in anything I do in the future, of finding a way of talking about the problems whilst not making it kind of personal.
I think I agree with that, and that we should be talking more about the role of women. I mean, one thing that's interesting in the parallel to the transracialism discussion is that there was a pretty uniform response from Black people against this kind of identification in, and that's something that's just not true in the feminist movement, right? It's not that, and I think it would have made a huge difference. If women had been speaking with, if there was a majority voice that was this is not okay, it's disrespectful, it's it tramples on feminist projects, or it encroaches sex-based rights, we'd be having a really different conversation now, I think. So the fact that so many women are on board with gender identity ideology and then actually furiously infighting with other feminists over these issues is a huge part of the explanation of why we are where we are.
The only thing I just add that I disagree with there is that I do think the majority of women probably think that gender identity, if they even knew about it, would think that doesn't make any sense, because it doesn't make any sense. But what it is it's a disproportionate number of progressive women in positions like running Twitter feeds or being on boards or not being boards, but being employees of third sector organizations. They are very active and signed up to all this, and they have an effect, a disproportionate effect. Because I just don't want to mix this up with the idea that this is a populist majority position, that gender identity ideology is the mainstream. I don't think it is. I really don't think it is. I just think that it's in very powerful little bubbles. A lot of women believe it.
But do you think inside feminism it would be fair to say women mainly agree with it, or do you not even think that's true?
I don't know about that, because obviously you get into what is feminism, and there's a version of feminism, or there's something that calls itself feminism that seems to be quite widely held amongst people who call themselves feminists, that is, feminism is for everybody, trans women are women, that just bears very little resemblance to the thing that I'm into. So I know they both call themselves feminism, but I don't think they're the same.
Okay.
Okay.
Powering through our list.
Powering through, I think we might. I can see a couple of questions in Q&A.
I see
but
that.
Let's keep going, because we've only got a few more on our list, and we've got about 25 minutes left.
And I had 2 more by email if we're willing to do some blind.
Okay. Had the use of bad statistics by trans activists shed any light on past strategies used by feminists?
This is interesting, because I had this kind of revelation at a certain point where I got way less angry with trans activists once I realized some of the dodgy tactics the second wavers had been using. And actually this came from reading Christina Hoff Sommers' book, because I was trying to read the feminist, what do you call them? The anti-heroes, or there's probably some better word for,
I don't know, renegades.
The
feminists.
Sommers and Paglia. These the ones who kind of are feminists but are going against the grain. So I wanted to just read them and see what they had to say. And Sommers does this absolutely meticulous kind of takedown of campus rape statistics and domestic violence statistics. And it just, there's these amazing stories about these zombie stats that one organization that hadn't really done its research properly would say, but then because the network was so dense, everyone else would start repeating these claims, and it would just take absolutely ages to make them die. And it undermines the credibility of the movement, right? Because someone can easily do the research and show that that's a wild exaggeration, and then sort of just make you look silly. And I had a personal experience recently. I haven't done all the fact checking yet, but I was just brazenly using some of Andrea Dworkin's numbers about the witch burnings. So I just read her book and was like, surely she's done her research, right? So then I taught my students, 9 million witches were burned during this particular... That's what she says. And then it was in a lecture I gave, and then it was in a talk that I gave in 2 different countries. And then there was a guy in the audience in this talk in... can't remember where it was, but he was like, that number is orders of magnitude too high. And he sort of explained why and what we know. And so I think I've just kind of constantly confronted these stats or numbers that are just like reckless and obviously have just been put in the service of political goals. And it's made me a lot more kind of compassionate, I think, about what's going on in trans activism. It's like, don't throw stones when you're in a glass house.
Purpose, I think.
Yeah.
I had a similar experience when I was reading Kipnis's book. I don't remember what it's called. I'm just looking at it. It's Unwanted Advances.
Yeah, I liked that book.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I agree with everything you just said. I think it's easy to do, obviously. Like, I haven't had stats training. If I read something that seems from an authoritative source, right, I'll start to believe it, because that's what we're wired to do. It would be really inefficient for humans to have to go and check out every belief that they hold. Right. We get most of our beliefs from authority or taken on trust. And it's exacerbated massively now by the professionalization of universities. So they're constantly churning out like attractive, attention-grabbing headlines like "scientists have shown that," and then
you read it.
Conclusion in here that. And then you look at the paper occasionally, you go back to the paper and you think, what? Like this, this is set up so prejudicially or whatever. So there's a big problem with disinformation, as we know, but I do think, especially academic feminists, have a responsibility not to contribute to it. Yeah. And one of the shocking things is that there are lots of professors calling themselves feminists or calling themselves gender studies professors who, they are gender studies professors, who don't seem to feel any responsibility to like connect with empirical reality when the things they say, they're just so, because I suppose that comes from a kind of ideological background where you think that everything is constructed and in a sense you're doing good work by naming the world you want to see or something like that, and maybe reality will catch up if you just keep saying it, but it doesn't work like that, as we know. So
okay, next question. It's a commitment of feminism that women can unlearn their sexist socialization and try to become free. Seems to me we should believe the same thing about men, but what would it take exactly for a man to have unlearned male socialization? And if we could come up with a precise answer to that question, would we mind those men being in women-only spaces?
Okay, well, I think this question, we've already covered some of it, right? So it depends on what you mean by male socialization. And I don't think it's possible for people not to be socialized in a way that's connected to their sex. So in that sense, I don't think we can get everyone to unlearn it all, but we can get people to, we can over time, I think, more optimistically, try and change certain kinds of really harmful influences. But the question about would we mind those men, so I suppose you have in mind some kind of male figure who is, I don't know what would it be, like not aggressive, not sexually aggressive, has what, I don't know, what would it be? I can't think of a way to articulate that such that those people would be okay in women-only spaces. No, that's not how women-only spaces work, right? Women, as everybody knows watching this, I assume, women-only spaces are a means by which, a very broad brush means by which we exclude a few predators by excluding all males. Yeah, it could never work along a sort of, club guest list. You can come in, no, not you. How would that work? It wouldn't work. So no, most single-sex spaces do not have people at the door, right? So it all relies on a social norm that we have to internalize, and it can't just be like, well, I'm a nice chap, I've got no ambitions to invade these women's privacy or attack them, so I can come in. It just can't work like that. So all this attempt to conceptualize the perfect male psyche or physiognomy such that it is allowed in but not these people misses the point of how single-sex spaces work in institutions, I think.
Okay.
What do you think?
No, I don't know. I guess I'm just I'm curious about this question. I mean, there's something that Marilyn Fry said that I think about a lot, but she said it in the context of race, right? Like doing the work of unlearning racist kind of, I guess socialization is not quite the word, but like whatever it is we've learned. And then she sort of applies it to sex as well. And I guess I just often think about what's the work? Like, what does it take? In principle, what would it take for us to really trust a man and think that if we could have a policy that would tell us the difference between the men who we were worried, because it's not biology. I think there's something in the kinds of things that Butler and the other gang say when they're like, it's not about the penis. It's like, it's irritating, but they're sort of right that it's not about the penis, right? It's about the socialized maleness. So I think I just get curious about what exactly is the stuff where if we knew that stuff was gone, would it sort of change?
Well, it's not necessarily a fully rational kind of desire either, in the sense, and I don't mean by that it's irrational. I just mean that like a lot of women, because they're, we are brought up in a mostly heterosexual world, we don't want to get undressed in front of the opposite sex that we don't know. I think that works both ways, right? It's not even about necessarily being worried about being attacked, although you undoubtedly are, especially if you're a woman, but even if you could get rid of the threat of attack somehow from a stranger that you don't know, it's privacy, it's feeling self-conscious, it's like, there's lots of, because of heterosexuality, there is lots of social meanings that cannot be eradicated around becoming undressed.
Yeah.
And I don't see why. I think we're misunderstanding what it is if we're trying to do a rational calculation, like, if we could get rid of this, would it be all right? It's more about a fully comprehensive kind of set of emotional attitudes, desires, feelings about bodily integrity, privacy, that there's no reason to try and dismantle that or to set up spaces that somehow don't. I don't know.
No, I see what I see what you're saying.
Okay. Okay, now I see we've got another controversial one coming up. One fault line in gender critical feminism seems to be the women adamant about working within the left only and women more open to working across the political spectrum. A Woman's Place UK are a good example of the former, I think. Whoever wrote this, not me. And Meghan Murphy and Julie Bindel are two examples of the latter, I think. Do you think this will remain a source of tension?
Yeah, I like this question because I've sometimes felt really frustrated. I think I'm one of the people that's in the Bindel/Murphy type camp where I'm like pretty open to who we work with, and maybe at least I want to hear more about it. Like if I'm invited to do something at a place that's obviously like religious, for example, then I want to look into what else they've been involved with. But I'm in principle kind of interested in working maybe with anyone or with a lot of different people from different perspectives. And I sort of relate not being willing to a kind of closed-mindedness that we're finding really frustrating from trans activists. So something in me like really dislikes the black and white thinking of the drawing the line at the left as though that's a really coherent, there's a really sharp line you can draw. So But I had this thought the other day that it's like a moral philosopher take, I guess, but I had this thought that maybe the ones who are more purist about working within the left, they have to perform anger at us who are willing to work across the spectrum. We could live and let live, but I think they have to perform it to show that they actually are committed to working only within the left. Like if they could just live and let live with everybody going off and doing things with the right, they would look complicit, right? And that would undermine their credentials as being like very much committed only within the left. So I was sort of thinking maybe some of that anger and outrage is actually more performative than sincere, and so we on the Bindle/Murphy side shouldn't get so upset about it, because it's just, they're not actually mad at us, they're just showing their values. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. But so it's a kind of like purity spiral where once people around you start assuming that you're complicit, then you have to show that you're not.
Exactly.
And then the more that other people start showing that they're not, the more that you have to, because your silence is interpreted as complicity.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's complicated, isn't it? I mean, I have all sorts of incoherent thoughts about this. One thought I have is that just left and right, generally speaking, even just take out feminism, left and right no longer names the only options, as it were. Like there's positions which are socially or sort of economically left and culturally right, right? And that so again, although I have and do describe myself as on the left, I'm increasingly like allergic to doing so, because it brings a whole bunch of assumptions about where I must be and things I must think, and I don't.
Yeah.
There is a big there's different versions of the right, as we all know. So there's in America the right is different to the UK right. And right and left are relative terms relative to what the norm is in that country. So what looks left in America looks right in the UK. So it's just difficult, I think. But I think I'm not actually sure that. I'm just thinking about Julie in particular, and Julie Bindel, and thinking that she isn't someone that I would put with Megan. I think they respect each other as far as I can see, but Julie is more keen. She just wrote something the other day about why we shouldn't work with certain versions of the right, I think. So,
okay.
The danger is alliances with powerful right-wing factions, particularly in America, who blatantly have no interest in the package deal. They only have an interest in asserting biological difference as the source of womanhood and manhood.
Yeah.
But they aren't on board with any of the other things that a feminist might be interested in. And that is strategically a danger. It's not morally a danger, it's strategically a danger. But the people that make those alliances assess the risks. And I am open to the idea that I don't understand the American situation. I'm not there. And equally, American people don't understand the UK situation or the Australian one.
Yeah.
So people make their own decisions and people draw their own lines. And I do respect that. Other people draw their lines differently to me. I don't criticize them for it. I have in the past, like 2 years ago now, on one day, made a couple of tweets that have come back to haunt me ever since, where I said something about particular gender critical feminists who were, I thought, crossing the line or drawing the line in a different place to me.
Yeah. I
kind of regret those tweets now, partly because of all the hassle I've had since, but also partly because at the time I felt very isolated for various reasons, and I felt like it was important for my own strategy to show I was not to be put in this group with these people.
Yeah.
But since then, I've thought differently about that. So, I mean, I'm not in the same group, but I didn't need to perform, I think.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it's complicated.
Okay, well, apologies to Julie Bindel for misclassifying her in that question. Hope that doesn't start no, it won't. Okay, this is a kind of question for maybe the academics. Well, Okay, I'll just ask the question. So, the political philosopher Elizabeth Anderson distinguishes pure moral argument from all of the contentious actions of politics, and she suggested that pure moral argument isn't enough to induce social change. And I feel like this is a view we see a bit in feminism, that the political activism is the real work and the theory is just like fucking around in the ivory tower. So I'm interested in your take on what you see as the place of theory within feminism and feminist activism in particular.
Well, I reflect quite a lot on the role of academic feminists.
Yeah.
And I think I want to make a distinction between two kinds. There's the social scientists, the ones that are doing the empirical work, hopefully, like accurately recording the state of women's lives, what women want, what they need, what they have, and recording all of that accurately, and we need them. But that's not really theory, although they can be theoretically inflected. If we're talking about high theory, like really abstract, unempirical stuff, really...
I'm not sure I understand.
My watch is told you it's not sure.
Like high theory? I don't know what high theory is. Fair enough, watch.
Yeah, so when it comes to high theory, I honestly think that this is kind of provocative, that the only role for academic feminists is to correct the ridiculous things that other academic feminists say.
Mm-hmm.
And that is my role right now. You know, that's why I'm writing my book, because a need has been created by preposterous claims that don't make any philosophical sense. And then they've had some purchase in the culture, and now we need to do our best as philosophers to speak from that place and say, no, not everyone agrees with that, and that's actually wrong.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, I think grassroots is where it's at. Like, feminism is about what women need and what contributes to their well-being, I think. And women outside the ivory tower know better than academics what they need and what their well-being consists in. So I think feminism should be populist, it should be grassroots, and in an ideal world, theoreticians wouldn't have much to say. And I think I say at the end of my book, like, just be suspicious of some academic coming along and telling you something that's really surprising or controversial. Like, did you know there's no such thing as women? Wow, how cool, you know, because chances are that conclusion has been drawn for reasons of its novelty. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of filled a position in logical space that was empty. And, you know, there's a constant push in academia for the new and the sexy and the reversal. Like, you may have thought it was this, but actually you may have thought this was the cause and this was the effect, but actually this is the cause and this is the effect. And wow, a switch, how sexy and how interesting. It's got absolutely nothing to do with women's lives, and it can actually hurt them, as we see through the prison service and the influence of Judith Butler. So yeah, that's my view. Ideally, I wouldn't have this job. I think
there was actually a really good example of that in one of our department meetings recently. So we had to make a policy decision, and someone in the group was like, well, I have argued that P in a philosophy journal, and seemed to believe that was a reason that we should adopt that as departmental policy. And I was like, that is absolutely mad. Like, we argue all sorts of nonsense in the philosophy journals because it fills a position in logical space, or it's interesting, or like that. But that's not it's not the view that we should just have as policy. So I found that quite astonishing, actually.
Absolutely. And now that, you know, the university system's gone the way it is, and we're supposed to churn out 5 articles a year, like literally everything has been argued in a journal at some point, and will be.
Yeah.
With an average of 5 readers per article. So, you know, people, when academics churn out their big ideas, as we can see, they very often have no idea about how this would be implemented.
Totally.
They don't know what's going on. I mean, most of the transactivist academics that I come across just seem absolutely resistant when you point out like facts at them. They just don't believe you, or they're not interested, or it just makes no difference. It skims off the surface of their minds. They're just not interested in how empirical reality is and how it might interact with these bold ideas.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, good. Okay.
So what is your view on trans-identifying males standing as candidates in women's shortlists? And then the question is, do you think we should scrap shortlists now? So what do you think?
Oh, I find it absolutely enraging every time I hear about a male person standing in a women-only shortlist. I'm furious. And I don't care if that person passes well or has lived as a woman for 5 years. I mean, there's just so many reasons why, the whole reason why that thing was put in place being to advance women's underrepresentation or bring, marginalized perspectives in, which there's no reason to think that it would do. I'm furious about it. And I don't think that means we should scrap shortlists. I think maybe one constructive thing we could fight for is having additional shortlists for gender minorities rather than piling them all in with the women as though there's just one marginalized group. But that's sort of trans activist job to argue for, and it's obviously easier just to get in on our stuff. So I don't know how feasible that is.
I don't know if you could you have shortlists like with two different kinds of shortlists? I also thought the point of a shortlist was it kind of narrowed down the potential candidates to this shortlist.
Oh, well, the women's only political party shortlists are just like getting a few of that group, right? Like it's not the whole selection. So you're right, if it's just one job, whatever, maybe you can't. But if it's like there's multiple positions to be filled and you dedicate one of them to gender minorities and 10 of them to women, then fine. Yeah.
I don't know ultimately what I think about shortlists, generally speaking, but I absolutely know that I think that now we have them in certain areas, they should do what they were set up to do. Otherwise, it's pointless. And I share your fury about how people don't seem to see that. And it's just so insulting.
Yeah.
To have, there's a Democratic, I don't really know what role this person has in the Democrats in America. It was some kind of local level politics, but there's a video of this person giving a rousing talk occupying a woman's officer role.
Is this the guy in the like maroon tight dress that's got the crotch bulge?
Yeah.
Okay. I've been meaning to look him up, but I can't remember his name.
It's just not what
exactly.
Those roles were designed for. So if that's the way it's going, then yes, scrap them, because now we have this kind of incoherent position, then scrap them. But it'd be much better if we just kept to their original purpose and then worked out whether we need that purpose or not. Yeah, so it's just lazy thinking and irritating.
Good. Okay, we're at past, so I think we should probably end it there. Thank you so much for making the time, and I know it's quite early in the morning there, so I really appreciate you getting out of bed.
I really enjoyed it, and thanks to everybody. I can see that there's been like really lively chat going on. I can see some arguments in the corner of my eye, but thank you all for participating, and cheers.
Yeah, thank you. And next month I think is going to be Susan Hawthorne, Anna Kerr, and maybe some other mystery guests, so we'll send out an email. Good night.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.